Is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today is Wednesday, May 26th. I'm Donna Will, Professional Development Coordinator for the Developmental Disabilities Administration. We welcome you to the Maryland Community of Practice for Supporting Families webinar series. The title of our webinar today is Using Charting the Life Course with Teachers and Families. This session is being facilitated by Kane-Breschi, Director of Family Supports for DDA, and her special guests include Dr. Gregory, Knollman. He's a Ph.D., Assistant Professor at the College of Education, Department of Special Education at Towson University. And also with us is Donne Allen, Parent and Director of Special Projects at SEEC. In addition, both Greg and Donne are Charting the Life Course ambassadors, and Donne is a Charting the Life Course coach. Before we begin, I'd like to go over a few things about the webinar. All participants are in listen-only mode. There's two options for listening to the webinar, by computer and phone, and you can switch by using the appropriate button on the webinar panel. There are handouts for this webinar. There are 4 of them, and you can find them in the handout section in the panel on your right. They can also be emailed if you are listening by phone. We are recording the webinar and posting it on the DDA website. We'd like to hear from you to get feedback on today's presentation and any suggestions you might have for future topics. Please use the question or chat box to the right on your panel to provide it. In addition, we're interested in highlighting how people with disabilities and their families are connecting during this pandemic throughout the webinar series. If you're interested in sharing your story, please contact Mary Ann Kane-Breschi directly at mary.kane-breschi@maryland.gov or me, donna.will@maryland.gov. If you have questions related to your family member services, please contact your CCS, that's Coordinator of Community Services, and or your local regional office. So now I'd like to introduce Mary Ann Kane-Breschi.
Thank you, Donna. Good afternoon, everyone. And on behalf of the Maryland Community of Practice for Supporting Families, welcome to our webinar. The purpose of this series for supporting families is to bring people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and families and others together to share information and knowledge, build skills and resiliency within ourselves and in the community. Particularly when we first got started, the emphasis was really on getting through COVID, but we really are just getting through life. Throughout this series, we've discussed and addressed a variety of topics and concerns with which individuals and families are facing related, as I said, related to COVID-19, but now as we return to community and everyday life with the help of invited guests and subject matter experts and through the lens of Charting the Life Course. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Charting the Life Course, it is a set of universal principles and tools. Its fundamental principle states that all people have the right to live, love, learn, work, and play, and pursue their aspirations in the community. It was developed out of the University of Missouri, Kansas City, their Institute for Human Development Family-to-Family program. It was designed by families and people with disabilities for other families and people with disabilities in order to help them to begin to think about a vision for their good life. Think about what they're going to need, what they need to know, how to navigate and or develop supports and resources, and finally discover what it takes to live lives that they're choosing and do it. Today, our guest will talk about how Charting the Life Course is being used with teachers and families to inform the IEP and transition process. Donna has already told you about them, but I'm going to repeat it because it warrants doing so. I want to welcome both Dr. Gregory Knollman. Dr. Knollman is an assistant professor in the College of Education, Department of Special Education at Towson University. He's also a Charting the Life Course ambassador and member of the Maryland Community of Practice statewide leadership team. Donne Allen is the Director of Special Projects with SEEC. She's also a parent, and Greg is also a sibling. We failed to indicate that before. Both Donne and Greg are Charting Life Course ambassadors, as Donna had mentioned before. Donne is a coach, and she's also a member of the COP statewide leadership team. I want to thank you both for being here with us today. taking your time and sharing your expertise with that. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Greg.
Thanks, Marianne. So really, to get us started, I want folks to have a orientation or a frame to person-centered planning. And we'll start with just some general definitions and then get into some of our presentation objectives. So Marianne, if you could kind of help me move forward with the slides, that would be really helpful.
Sure will.
So person-centered is a systematic way to generate actions around a person's goals and how to achieve them. In its broadest sense, we all do some form of person-centered planning as we think about how we strategically move through transitions that we make across our lifespan. When we think about person-centered approaches, there are some core features to consider. Typically, it involves a support team. There's a focus on the development of a comprehensive personal profile that's going to highlight the focal person's strengths, abilities, capacities, and gifts, and really emphasize those areas that are positives rather than the limitations. There are typically going to be use of graphics to illustrate ideas. Participation is not only inclusive, but is going to emphasize involvement of the focal person. There is traditionally a facilitator that's used to help guide the process, and a team who's willing to reconvene on multiple occasions to share progress and make connections when needed. Additionally, when we apply person-centered approaches specifically to transition planning, it's considered a team-driven approach, and the team is going to aid that focal person in developing a vision for the future, along with challenges and barriers to reach their vision for the future. By focusing on person-centered and family-centered values, it also really emphasizes that value of personal strengths and the efforts of families and advocates ultimately working with that focal person. Now, there's no set time limit to these person-centered approaches. There's no set number of team members, and there's no standard organization. The idea is really that it's kind of meant to develop organically. It's a process to aid traditionally the individual that is going through a transition or in need of some additional planning supports. And as Morgan and Reeson point out, it's actually been utilized most often in the transition supports and transition planning for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. It's a useful way to build relationships and expand networks, and we're just really excited to be talking a little bit more about some of these person-centered approaches today with a real focus on charting the life course. Go ahead, Marianne. So with that broad orientation, I want to talk about some of the specific objectives of today's presentation. It's designed first and foremost to share two things. One, how one university, Towson, is incorporating elements of person-centered approaches to education and transition planning within their teacher education or teacher preparation program to advance the knowledge of our pre-service teachers and teacher leaders and techniques that they can use to help strengthen relationships with families and advocates. It's also designed as a way to highlight how families are utilizing person-centered approaches and specific person-centered tools to facilitate conversations and strengthen collaboration with school leaders around the individualized education program, IEP, and individualized transition planning processes, or the ITP. So we hope to accomplish this today in three ways. We want to identify how person-centered approaches are discussed within one personnel preparation program for teachers. We want to share some examples of how a person-centered framework supports exploration, planning, decision-making, and problem-solving for students with a variety of disabilities, and also how to support their families. And we want to gather information on how person-centered approaches and student-directed planning has been incorporated into practice. And so we're going to continue to kind of move on and talk a little bit about that in some more detail now. Go ahead, Mary. So considering what we know, I just want to reiterate that the purpose of person-centered planning includes ensuring that the focus is on the person with a disability when identifying valued life outcomes, where to live, where to work, where to learn, and where to play. And as we talk about charting the life course more specifically, they also have this emphasis also on love, or how to build community as well. So it's not just live, learn, work, and play, but also that aspect of lifelong supports and making sure that we're really connected to our communities. So really creating that system that actualizes the outcomes that we want to achieve, rather than allowing currently available services just to dictate what is possible and what are reasonable goals for the future. Go ahead, Marianne. Person-centered approaches involve a number of different individuals. Typically, again, the focus is on the student or individual with a disability. And then from there are a number of others involved. We will see parent or family members, and sometimes that can include siblings or extended family. Teachers and administrators may be involved. Related service providers like occupational therapists, physical therapists, and speech therapists may be involved. There may be representatives from various adult service agencies, such as DDA or our Department of Rehabilitation Services. And then there are also certain person-centered meetings that involve close friends and neighbors as well. Go ahead. While there historically, the orientation of person-centered approaches within education, and more specifically within special education, have really been around since the late 70s or early 80s. And there have been a number of approaches that have developed over time. Some of those include circles of support and circle of friends. Others include the MAPS, or making action plans, as well as the planning for alternative tomorrows with hope. So some of you on the call may be familiar with some of these approaches and have used some of the tools that are associated with those person-centered planning approaches. Additional ones may include group action planning, as well as person futures planning. Today, we're going to focus our time and energy really on charting the life course. But before we do that, I want to just highlight how our university has adopted kind of this approach to teaching teachers about these various models. So let's start with the PATH model. Go ahead. So with the PATH process, or the planning, planning for alternative tomorrows with hope, there are 8 steps. And the idea really is that we're trying to ensure that the individual really focuses on their vision for the future, helping a team of individuals set a goal for the future, and the individual with disabilities really get that sense of how they're going to accomplish those future life goals. To do that, there's a series of steps that we work through, again, really emphasizing that notion of strength. Traditionally, our students that go through our teacher preparation program have focused on this particular orientation to person-centered planning. But again, there are many others. More recently, as we've gotten to know charting the life course through our work with the state COP, we've begun to utilize charting the life course as well in our courses. Go ahead, Marianne. So according to the framers of charting the life course, the origins began around 2011 with a group of diverse national and state disability leaders who met to develop recommendations on the type of supports that families needed, particularly to aid their children and the individuals they worked with who had intellectual or developmental disabilities. The aim was really to ensure that there was an inclusive life and that individuals were able to pursue what they wanted in community, pursue independence, and experience integration and full participation. So since its early emphasis, it's really been around building a community of practice. And we really see that sense of community as being integral to pre-service teachers working with families and with students with disabilities. Go ahead. Charting the life course, this framework has taken off in the last 10 years. It's only been 10 years, but they are already now in 20+ states. They initially had started with just 5, and this model has grown and really caught fire, particularly within communities that particularly work with individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. It's being introduced in a number of different ways. Some states are really focusing on educational systems change and trying to see how we can incorporate person-centered approaches and some of the tools from charting the life course. and their framework within school systems and school settings. In other instances, it's really seen at a broader systems change within the state itself. So utilizing new ways to reach target populations in employment, housing, and managed care, as well as education. The emphasis really being still on family support and strengthening self-advocacy networks. So as a result of the broad implementation, it's really important that as much as possible, as we're learning about it, that we're providing consistent training on these principles to our future teachers who are likely going to end up in classrooms that may be utilizing some of these particular approaches. So I'd like now to talk a little bit about how we have adopted charting the life course as one of our person-centered approaches in our teacher preparation instruction. Go ahead. So as a university partner within our state community of practice, we wanted to incorporate charting the life course into courses that already place an emphasis on person-centered approaches to supporting families and individuals with autism and intellectual disabilities as they encounter transitions across their lifespan. In our graduate transition courses, we incorporate charting the life course by first acknowledging the broad range of transition assessments and planning tools that are out there that aid families with the transition from birth through adulthood. As students investigate some of these core elements of the transition assessments and instruments that are out there, they also begin to practice utilizing some of the planning tools that they're exposed to within the course content so that they can specifically see how they would apply it to their practice. For our graduate students, many are in-service teachers. They're already actually working in classrooms. And so they're also sharing some of the transition assessments that they're required to use as part of that transition to adulthood. Again, in Maryland, we emphasize that students starting as early as age 14 should begin thinking about transition planning, and that an aspect of the IEP should be devoted to that planning process. At the end of our course in transitions, we ask our students to reflect on the application of the tools that they've practiced on using, and specifically reflect on how they will continue to utilize some of these things in serving families. The aim is for more of our graduate students and our current teachers to practice using the tools and develop new and creative ways to incorporate charting the life course and other person-centered approaches within their practice. So in addition to working with our graduate students in service, we also utilize person-centered approaches within another graduate course, and that is our family, working with families course. Here we're piloting the use of person-centered approaches to specifically test out how families are utilizing these particular approaches within their own ability to build relationships with the teachers, administrators, and support providers that they work with. So again, from a pre-service standpoint, we start with that pre-assessment. What do they previously know about transition planning? What prior work have they done to learn about transition assessments? What exposure do they have to prior transition outcomes or knowledge of transition processes for youth with disabilities? And then we offer additional supports, helping them get connected with those specific procedures, how to utilize some of these person-centered approaches. So in addition to the in-service work, we also work with our pre-service teachers. These are students in our undergraduate courses. And within our undergraduate course, they have very limited knowledge of working with families. While some of our pre-service teachers may be siblings of individuals with disabilities or may themselves have a disability, again, they come from a lot of different diverse backgrounds and experiences, all very eager to be future teachers. We, again, incorporate a very similar model with our graduate students. We ask them what they previously know. We expose them to current outcome data for students with disabilities, and then walk them through some of the tools that they can use to ultimately support the families they're about to work with in their future practice. Go ahead. So while it's really important for us to be able to offer these trainings or incorporate them, embed them into our pre-service and in-service instruction, we know that it doesn't stop there. just simply providing students with a tutorial on person-centered approaches and how to utilize some of these frameworks and specific tools isn't enough. There need to be new opportunities for collaboration where students are actually getting out and practicing this more often. There also need to be new opportunities for collaboration in which faculty are directly involved in assisting with facilitation of some of these person-centered approaches within the community. We know we need to include information that focuses on school-wide professional practices to ensure students are prepared to transition to independent and semi-independent living. We know that there needs to continue to be an emphasis on advocating for students and families, but also ensuring that we are supporting the individual with disabilities in really becoming that strong self-advocate, having the agency and feeling empowered to really talk about their strengths and recognize the efforts that they ultimately play, the agency they have in their own transitions. Teaching our teachers to better support that self-advocacy training and development early on by reinforcing opportunities within their classrooms and within their practice to really help the students home in on their focus on self-advocacy. And then ultimately just continuing to reiterate to our in-service and pre-service teachers that they need to remain open-minded about what their students, current and future, envision for their good life, what they want and what they don't want. The emphasis, again, really being on, are we truly listening to what our families are asking? Are we listening to what our students are interested in engaging with, both academically, but orienting themselves toward their future outside of school, so post-graduation or post-life outside of education. I'd like now to transition to really hearing how families are utilizing this. Again, it's nice for us to talk about how schools should ultimately approach this and how we're trying to emphasize that within pre-service teaching, but I think you're going to gain a lot more by looking at how it's actually being used by families. So with that, I'll pass it over to Donne.
Yes, so that's pretty much my point of view on this whole presentation, is to bring to light how I've been able to use this with my own son in my own life. And I am a Charting the Life Course ambassador, and through that work, and now a certified coach, and through that work, just have found the value of how to advocate effectively for my son, especially in terms of IEP meetings, which tend to be very long and drawn out from the perspective of the parent, because we're not necessarily involved or embedded into the everyday educational structures that are taking place. And so when you get that packet, it can be a little daunting because you're wondering where your voice is and all of that, and how you see your son in a totally different way. You see your son or daughter in a totally different way than the school does. And then how do you get what you know and all of the strengths that your son or daughter brings to the table? How do you present that in a way that is effective and can follow your child during his time at school? And so I'm introducing you to my son Asante through this profile here, which is something that I was able to learn how to create using the Charting the Life Course framework. I became introduced to it through the Maryland Community of Practice for Supporting Families, and went to a conference and took the ambassador course not once but twice, because it really is really difficult to kind of grasp all at once. And once I took the course the second time, a light bulb kind of went off, and I was able to figure out the ways that I could impact it on a personal level, but also professionally, because I am working at a disability service agency, and so able to use that information and bring it to our staff who work with people directly as well. But on a personal level, in my parenting, I just wanted to take all of the things that I knew about my son and be able to present it to his IEP team so that they could use that information in the best way to impact him on a day-to-day basis. So this one-page profile is it's not everything that he is, but it's a really good grasp of who he is and the ways that they could tap into to enhance everyday his everyday life as he was in school. So, and there's also a whole nother trajectory sheet that was presented earlier that Greg showed that goes along with this, that kind of goes through that year and showing what is the vision for his life for that year. But in going through this, I was able to describe my son in the best way that I could. And I didn't take it lightly. I wanted to make sure that they knew he loves to talk. And so if you can get him to talk and you can get him to converse with you about what he's learning, that is the one way that he learns. And a lot of times they use worksheets, and worksheets aren't not really translated well with my son. He will do them, but it has to happen after a conversation. It has to happen after a lot of dialogue because he is very verbal. And the one thing that they knew, and I think that this goes back to what Greg was saying about having some kind of experience with this child that you're working with. And so the team that he was working with, they've known him since kindergarten. However, there were so many holes that they weren't kind of grasping. And it wasn't until I presented this information to them in this way that it kind of filled in the gaps for them. So they knew all about his affable nature. They knew he was pretty funny, and they really did know that he works hard. They knew that in the beginning of the year, after you have the summer slide and you kind of come back, it's really hard for him. And so they use that time to kind of build rapport with him. And throughout the year, what happens with my son is that he builds a rapport, he trusts, he becomes more amenable to all of his teachers. And by the end of the year, he's like a superstar. But they couldn't figure out what was the issues like with him. And so using this, like how to best support me, and that's framework that I was able to kind of say to them, if you give him one-step directions, if you're very clear with him and you have to make sure you have his full attention, those are the types of things that that is like really was helpful for them to understand him. So other children, maybe you can give them multi-step directions, but for my son, it has to only be one step. Otherwise, you're going to get lost in steps 2, 3, and 4. He's not going to pay attention to that. So that was like a huge aha moment. They figured that was the case, but until it was verbally expressed or written down on a paper, they didn't quite grasp it. So that was an aha for them. And in this meeting, going through all of his needs and all of the things that he aspired to in the future, and seeing all of the people that are in his life that he could tap into, that was really impactful for them. What would have been a very boring IEP meeting, because let's face it, IEP meetings are not the most entertaining, but what could have been very boring actually turned into a really robust and deep dialogue and a deep dive into what he needed for support and what they were able to offer but hadn't really tapped into. And so in this integrated support star, you see here, there were some technology needs that he could have tapped into that they weren't quite sure how to figure it out. But I was willing to say, hey, there are things that we want to get for him. There are things that we want him to have access to that he doesn't currently have, and we're working on it. And so they would, like the PT would work on certain things with him. He had a Segway that he was so scared to use. And so we were able to bring that to the school because he has mobility issues. He has multiple diagnoses, but mobility is a very big facet of his life. And so his PT was sitting there trying to think of ways that would keep him engaged so he wouldn't be so afraid to use what he had at his disposal. And so now he's using the Segway. As he goes to school, he uses it everywhere. I mean, it just writing it down, it was, number one, it was a goal. We went and got it, but then we realized, oh my goodness, he's scared to even use it. And so just building him up and having other people kind of commit to that same goal outside of home was really, really impactful for him. And now he's very, 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 very independent on the Segway. There are certain things that he wanted in his life that he was able to express. So even prior to us bringing this to the team, I put everything that I thought about him on there, and then I sat with him. He's a 4th grader, so he's he has his own mindset. It's not that he may understand all of the intricate details of what we were presenting here, but we were able to sit down and say, hey, what are some of the things in the future that you want to have access to? What are some of the ways, what are some of the things that are important to him? And so he was able to add things in here. I remember him specifically saying his hair and his personal style are very important to him. And that may seem like a small thing for an IEP team to pay attention to, but when he didn't feel like himself, he couldn't show up as a best student and in school. And so it was very important that we wrote that down. It's like, don't impede upon that. Make sure that he's able to express himself through his personal style. I mean, it doesn't seem like it's an educational goal, but for them it made sense because he's very, very vocal about that, and he advocates for that. And he wants to have a lot of new experiences, and he wants to continue making friends. Keeping friends is really difficult for him too. And so that's not an educational goal, but to put it in his IEP is still important from the perspective of parent and the student to enter, so that the students, the teachers know that that's important to him. So you're not always in class with the kids that you like or you want to be around. When you go out into the playground, that's also a part of the educational environment. And so the teachers needed to know that, keeping friends was a struggle for him, and how could they cultivate that? And so they would think of different ways, and he would meet with the counselor. So he would actually have regular sessions with the counselor after this IEP meeting. And it's not something that he had tapped into before. And he just learned how to advocate for himself better because he saw it on paper. And because everybody had the same information, it was all written down, and we add to it all the time. We have added to it for 5th grade. I didn't put it on here because 5th grade was kind of COVID lifestyle, and it was very, very difficult to manage. So I didn't put that on here because it looked a lot different than typical. But we're creating one right now as we speak for middle school, and in preparation for middle school, because middle school is the next big transition for him. And so taking this and just having all of these thoughts that I had stored here put on a paper, it was very, very impactful. I know that the teachers, even afterward, they wanted to use this for not only their own children, but they wanted to use it for other children who struggle with IEP. So they were able to create, using this blank slate, using them to create for other kids that they knew may or may not have may not have advocacy in their lives. And so they were able to take what they knew and write up a profile for them to include that on their IEP. So I feel, number one, it's colorful and it draws you in. That's a small thing, but it draws you in so that people pay attention. I particularly love the LifeCourse tools. I have used maps for other people that we support at SEEC. And I'm also a graphic facilitator for MAP, so I understand that process quite well. But when you just really want to get pen to paper and you don't have a lot of resources, maybe you don't have a graphic facilitator, this is the way to go as far as being able to express your thoughts and have them put on paper, and you can change it. So that's the thing. It doesn't have to stay this way for the entire 4th grade. There may be things that come around during that school year that you're saying, hey, maybe I needed to include that. It's quite easy to just go and update this information. And it's quite easy. I have actually used it for other camps that I've been able to take this profile. Even though I made it for an IEP, I was able to use it for summer camp. I was able to use it for other programs that I wanted him to be involved in. Because a lot of times when people see a person with a disability that's a very visible disability, they kind of get stuck and they don't know how to broaden themselves outside of that disability. So this is a really good way to help them to broaden their perspective on who your child is, and you're being able to really get that down. So for me, it's very therapeutic to do this always and often, because it helps me to recognize the strengths of my child and not just all of the things that kind of weigh me down every day. It's not, we have a lot of doctor's appointments to go to. We still have a lot of work to do in his life, but this just helps for me to paint my child in the best light possible. And so I really, really appreciate the LifeCourse framework and what its impact is in my life. And I am very happy to share this information for any parent that needs to understand how to use it in order to build their advocacy for their son or daughter.
Thank you, Donne. I want to thank you both for the work that you do, recognizing the critical need to see the student, the person, in a more holistic manner, holistic terms, and plan accordingly, and also recognizing the role that families play, and actually as the role that the student or the person plays, and the need to work with both more effectively. It's just, you know, we can't stress it enough. And Donne, I want to thank you for sharing part of your life story. It's not an easy thing to do, but you do it so effortlessly and with such grace. I want to thank you. And with that, what we'd like to do now is we'd like to have a conversation. Greg and Donne, I'm going to welcome you to talk with one another as we eavesdrop for a few minutes. And then at the end, I'd like to open it up to our audience. And please feel free to submit any questions you have into the chat or the question box, and we'll take them towards the end of the hour. Alrighty, with that, Greg and Donne, welcome again.
Well, thanks. Thanks. And Donne, thanks for, again, sharing your really powerful story about how you've utilized these tools in some ways within kind of the conversations you have with teachers. I mean, I think that's so powerful. I was just thinking as you were talking too that while I don't have a specific cited resource to share to say, you know, why individuals get into teaching, I think my general hunch is that most folks go into teaching really excited to be able to work with students and with families. I don't think they go in for other reasons necessarily initially. So to see that some of these tools help to continue to ground us in kind of that student first, you know, recognize the person first, recognize the needs of the individual, and kind of see that and see those strengths, I think is really important reminders. You mentioned that you have incorporated these tools into your kind of IEP experiences. Have you noticed, have schools offered tools themselves, or have they done some prior work as well with Asante in terms of getting him connected to kind of his own IEP, or has this all been on you to do this?
Honestly, I hadn't seen any pre-work done from the schools as it relates to getting Asante ready for his IEP. I don't even know if he was aware of his IEP. I just know that once I started to say, you know, they give you that one piece of paper with like a paragraph that says kind of give the overview. And I just knew like innately, like, this is not enough. That's not enough space to even show all of the things that I know. And I think that even presenting it like that is a little bit daunting, because as a parent, you're looking at that piece and you're like, that's all that I have to give to kind of let them know who my child is. That's kind of, it's small, and it kind of frames like it's a small way of thinking. I don't think Asante knew about his IEP prior to us kind of going through this task. And he's not necessarily involved in it other than what how I bring him into it. But I did recognize that once we were able to do it and I was showing him what I thought, and he added or even took away some things, like, no, that's not me. Don't put that on there. I don't want anybody to know about that. You know, kind of I kind of had to respect some of the things that he was saying. But he didn't know about the IEP process prior to, and I think that that's a disservice to him, because he had a lot to say. And me using the tools to kind of bring him in really opened his eyes that, hey, I have something to say, and you know, if I can put it down and people will listen, I want to use my voice. And so he's been doing that ever since. And even after this specific IEP, he had a couple of bad experiences during his, what do you call it, before care. He went and had some kids that were kind of asking him questions about, you know, his disability, and he wasn't really comfortable. And so he was getting really upset. And so because he was able to talk to the counselor, because they had built that into, after this IEP had occurred, they built that into his support system. He asked the counselor if she would be willing to help him to put together a group of kids. Like, can he bring together all the kids from the before care to talk to them about his disability? And he kind of had his whole structure. He said, I'm going to answer 5 questions. It was about 90 kids. And he said, and that's it. And then after that, I'm going to give you some resources so that you can look up the questions that you have for yourself. Because I don't want to answer any more of your questions. I just want to be like you all. And I don't want you to ask me any more questions. And so I didn't even recognize that as an offshoot of, you know, kind of helping him understand his level of being an advocate for himself in the IEP process. But that did definitely come out of that IEP and in presenting that information. So I would encourage schools to really find some tools to help students to understand that they have their own voice and that they can include that in this meeting, no matter how young they are. And I think that the tools are, you know, pretty friendly to all ages. I think even a kindergartner could help to advocate for themselves if, you know, they had the right person that kind of facilitated that dialogue with them. They could get that information down. So I would encourage schools to find some tools and to tell the students in advance, you know, you have a voice here too, not just your mom and dad and not just the teachers. You should also be included in what happens in your everyday education.
Yeah, it's incredibly powerful. You know, that last story about how he has taken it upon himself just to kind of explain these things.
Yeah.
One of the other aspects, though, I think too, that's unique in hearing from self-advocates, particularly as they're transitioning into that middle school and then high school level where they might be more involved in their IEP, is that concern for being othered. You know, hey, I have these additional needs. And while as a former teacher, you know, oftentimes I would work with my students to specifically say, yeah, well, we all have needs. And this is just your way of being able to speak up and say, this is how I best learn. This is what's really going to help me. You know, some folks don't necessarily need the same level of supports, but it's there and it's important. But it's through this process that as they're starting to talk about it, they feel more comfortable and not quite as othered, where they start to hear from other students who don't have an IEP, but who also then are gathering in going, gosh, there's things that I also need now. There's aspects within my own life that I, you know, I have challenges with that I also just kind of need some support with. I think one of the other aspects that I find really interesting as you were just talking is the limited prior work potentially that's been incorporated into the IEP process. One of the things I hear from my in-service teachers in particular is, how do we embed this framework? How do we embed some of these tools into our practice rather than have it be another standalone thing? Because time is of the essence. There's never enough time to do everything that we need to accomplish. How have you been able to build this in so that teachers acknowledge it, have utilized it, have incorporated it into the IEP, so that it doesn't feel like just one more thing? I think that would be really helpful.
Yeah, it's not that easy, but I will say just taking the time to create that profile and then bringing it with you when you have like a parent-teacher conference. Number one, because a lot of times you're in parent-teacher conference and they only have a limited time. So sometimes it's negatively geared, or it's geared toward the things that are problems. And when you bring that tool to the table, or you bring those concepts about your child that it's a more positive light, you kind of come up with better solutions to some of the issues that maybe the teacher is seeing. I would think that I think the tools are just a way of shaping what you're already thinking. And so you're already thinking a certain way. You're already thinking that, well, my child does need a lot of support in this area, but that my child brings this wonderful, wonderful set of personality traits or a set of skills to the table. And we're not always considering them as it relates to when they have issues or when they have things that arise that are difficult to manage. And so having that tool reminds me, okay, let's not always focus on the problem. Let's figure out there's always a solution, even if it's not the way that we think, and we can always bring somebody else in to help us with that solution. So in that tool, it kind of lists some of the people that we tap into to help us to come up with the solution. And sometimes it takes, hey, can we have like a 10, 15 minute, like just talk about this one little problem. Can we have a 10, 15 minute conversation with somebody that's listed in that tool? It's just a reminder to me that I'm not doing this by myself. There's no way that I could do this by myself, and that I need to tap into a lot of people. Like we even tap into some of the building service guys at the school. I mean, it seems so trite, but he loves those guys, like, because they see him when he comes in, because he doesn't always use the same entrances as all the other kids because of the way that he needs to arrive in school. It's like once he comes in school and there's like this huge rush in the hallway, good God, he can't manage that. So we have to like figure out different ways for him to navigate. And so in that, he's learned to kind of build relationships with the support staff and tapping into the support staff at school, even like the lunch ladies, because he has to navigate lunch a little differently. And so maybe he does need to tap into the people around him as supports. And so just getting to know those people and them getting to know him, they really understand like his needs, and he's able to use them to help to, if he needs support. It's just a wonderful thing to know all of the people that it's not necessarily all the teachers, and the teachers shouldn't have the heavy on them at all times as well. There are other people in the school building that will be happy to help your child to mitigate what their support needs are. But you definitely do have to kind of think outside the box, use different entrances, go around the back doors. Sometimes all of these things are things that you need to do in order to kind of make the situation as the best possible situation for your son or daughter. So using these tools has helped just to remind me that I have more than just my husband and his siblings. There's a whole community of people out there that are willing to jump in and chip in, and it's just a good reminder to tap into them and not think that you're on an island by yourself trying to navigate all of this.
Yeah. I think one of the aspects there too that is really powerful is that in addition to this team, you mentioned that these tools, you bring some of these things to your IEP meetings, to help kind of help folks to refocus on those strengths, on those assets, and then use those strength-based approaches to kind of solving some of the challenges. I have heard from my in-service teachers, and I also then talk with our pre-service teachers about the fact that we can take what families bring to us using these tools. It doesn't have to be that we're always doing this just in our classrooms, that you can give these to families as well to fill out and have them bring that or share with you a few days before the IEP. And some of this can be embedded right there within the PLAF statement, within that present level of academic achievement and functional performance, where we're supposed to be really highlighting the students' strengths and the family input, and family very broadly defined as not just the student and the parents, but others. So you're talking about those other support members. The other aspect that I think is just really incredible is that I've heard from our in-service teachers this notion of this can also help to drive that specially designed instruction. These are the strengths, these are the areas of need, but then in addition, here are all of the individual's interests. Maybe we can utilize some of those interests, some of those assets to, again, better support the instruction, further the way in which we incorporate certain accommodations or learning strategies to really, again, support that individual's development, academic progress, as well as their kind of functional progress, their transition through life. So really powerful in that way as well.
Yeah, I have a question for you. And on that note too, before I get to my question, using that profile, they were able to hone in that my son loves sports, and so they use sports statistics to kind of like reach him in math, because math is one of his challenged subjects. So they use those, like they're like, you love the MLB, so they'll relate things as they're doing like one-on-one instruction. They'll relate things to sports, and that kind of gets his juices flowing a little bit better, and he's able to say, oh yeah, okay, as it relates to this stat for this, and then they talk about different players, and they bring that into the narrative just to help him to understand whatever concept they're doing. And they hadn't done that before because they knew he loved sports, but they didn't really think of, oh, we should be using that as a way of getting him to kind of get engaged more in the subjects that he's challenged with. But they were able to use those strategies. So that definitely speaks to what you were just referring to as an example of that. But my question to you is, do your undergraduate or graduate students ever get the opportunity to interact with students with disabilities and their families prior to becoming a teacher and stepping foot in the classroom?
Yeah, this is a great question. I'll kind of speak on this in two fronts. One, I think the pandemic has impacted all of us in some pretty unique ways. One of the greatest hurdles I think that we've had to overcome in pre-service instruction, particularly for our undergraduates, is how do we ensure that we're maintaining that high quality of connection with the students that are eventually going to serve in their full-time practice, but doing so in a virtual environment. So I give a lot of credit to our professional development schools that we work with and those sites, and kind of allowing us still to experience a lot of that interaction virtually. We've done a lot of our student teaching and our observations, still connecting students, being able to get them connected with classrooms, but through a virtual space. Now, pandemic aside, when there isn't necessarily that threat of not being able to meet in person, we do have a number of different opportunities for our undergraduates to go out and work with youth and families. Predominantly, though, the emphasis is on their practice in the classroom. So they're shadowing other teachers, they're observing practices that go on, they're building out lesson plans and testing aspects of those strategies and accommodations in classroom environments in the last 2 years, really, of their programming. Some get started a little earlier than that. But there is a little less involvement with the families. You know, their work is right there in the classroom. They see how their mentor teachers are the ones working directly with families. So the way that we've kind of counteracted that, at least in special education, is we have this course that really focuses on collaboration with families, working with families, and ensuring that we're bringing in families as guest speakers, we're bringing in self-advocates to often talk and share their stories. But when I think about it, there's still limitations to that. That's not a lot of exposure, and it's a very controlled environment within which that exposure takes place. So again, I think one of the ways in which we really see benefits to orienting ourselves in this person-centered approach is we're not going to be able to get you experience with all families. We're not going to be able to really help you to understand the depth and wide range of needs that an individual may have. We can talk to you in generalities about the different federally identified disability categories and what that might look like in terms of accommodations that you might provide. But you really have to get to know the individual. You really have to get to know the family in order to best understand how to serve the individual. And really, again, I go back to my hunch is that people go into teaching as an aspect of service, not just as a, they really go in with that mindset of, I want to make a difference. There's an aspect there. I want to ensure that students receive the content. Even those subject matter experts that I work with at the high school level, you know, those folks that are really geared toward and excited about content, maybe it's math, they're still really interested in engaging students in understanding the content that is really personal and exciting to them. So I think that there's this general interest in real service. But because we can only offer a limited number of opportunities, we need another approach, another way for folks to be able to leave and say, how can I build these relationships? Oh, well, there's a set of tools, there's a framework, there's different ways in which we can hopefully facilitate more conversations with families. Yeah.
Greg and Donne, I hate to do this. I hate to interrupt,
Okay.
but we have 5 minutes left. But first of all, I want to say, wow, what a powerful, inspiring, and instructive conversation, and such a rich conversation that the two of you have had, and our audience has been able to be a part of. And now I'd like to give them a chance to ask their questions, if there are any. And with that, I'd like to introduce Stephanie Jones, who is the Director of Innovation at DDA. But before I do that, I'd like to draw everyone's attention that we, as we usually do, we provide resources here within the PowerPoint, and this is one of your handouts. Along with, we provided the trajectory, the profile, the description of the principles and tools, and the integrated star for your using. And of course, here you have the website. If you want to get more information, you're welcome to contact me as well. So with that, Stephanie, we'll welcome Stephanie and any questions there might be.
There are no questions in the chat.
There are no questions. Well, that's fine. We have 4 minutes left. Then, Donne,
This is Patricia. There are some questions in the chat. It says, can you discuss the use of the tool set for adults with IBD? Our school never used this with our daughter, who is now an adult, and we are now facing long-term planning for her when her parents are no longer here. So they want you to discuss about that. And there's a couple of more questions.
what was the first part of that, Patricia? I'm sorry, I didn't.
Can you discuss the use of the tool set for adults with IBD?
Donne, would you like to take that?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Yes, we actually use these tools at SEEC quite often in our person-centered planning. It usually falls in our pre-planning, so that we can prepare for our annual PCP with the people we support. We use the profile on every year and update those. It really does help us to hone in on any interests and new ideas that a person might have for some of the goals they want to attain, and also thinking about the entire family, and are the parents aging, and do the parents have all of the resources, or the families have all the resources to help support their son or daughter. But it really is focused, number one, on the person and all of the things that they need and all of the ways that they have to access resources. So we use that in our pre-planning for our PCP plans, but throughout the year. And we've also used it for team building. We've used them to kind of uncover, what the goals are for specific projects that we might have. It's used in quite a variety of different ways. It's not just, it can be used for family planning. It can be used for person-centered planning. We do encourage each member of the family to create their own profile and trajectory so that we can use all of that information as we make a plan for the person that we're supporting, because everybody who's a part of that person's life is affected by whatever is happening to the people around them. So it's very important for us to be able to tell the family members, hey, we need to know what's going on with you, because whatever is impacting you is impacting the person that we're supporting. So
you have a couple of more.
Sure.
Okay. So how long did it take you, Dion, to develop the skill and then develop the actual profile for your son? And then the other one is, how can parents be trained on how to use this?
Sure. So for the actual profile, it takes about 30 minutes, maybe 45 minutes. The skill is a little bit different because it's a mindset that had to kind of like be cultivated. And so I took the ambassador's course, which was over the course of maybe 3 or 4 months, maybe a little bit longer than that. And so taking that helped me to cultivate that mindset. I did it twice because I really wanted to gain the knowledge, and I knew how impactful it would be for my both personal life and professional life. So I would say that it took about 6 months to understand the concepts, and I just completed it twice because I really wanted to ingrain that in my mindset. But the tools don't take that long to complete. 30 minutes, 45 minutes, it really is the things that come off the top of your head that you already have embedded in your mindset.
And if I can add with regard to how might families become trained here in Maryland, first and foremost, please, if you have an interest, to contact me. But I will also tell you that prior to COVID, we had, so we have the Maryland Community Practice for Supporting Families. There's a statewide leadership team. Prior to COVID, we had established 9 local COPs in local jurisdictions, several of them providing training to families on charting the life course. And we are looking at, we're revisiting how we might do that again in order to provide the training. And as Donne mentioned, you don't have to do the ambassador series to use the tools. So I don't want you to be, I don't want that to push you away. I want to encourage you to engage it. Please visit the website, chartingthelifecourse.com or lifecoursetools.com. And again, we're going to get to it. My contact information is the last slide of this presentation, so please contact me. Okay. And I think, Patricia, I think that's it.
That's it, yeah.
Yep, so it's new, it's 1. And I want to thank you all. Greg and Donne, you were spectacular. And maybe we can have you back again sometime soon. We are in the planning process of developing new webinars, so stay tuned and to listen for when our next one is to be scheduled. I want to thank Deputy Secretary Simons, Patricia Sestoki, Stephanie Jones for all of your support in making this possible. Please take care and have a great day. And there's my contact information if you'd like to reach me. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Take care.
Take care.